So we'll be reading Exodus chapter 3. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together, and say to them, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry, and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. Thank you.
Those are God's words, and thank you, Josh, for reading them with us this morning. We're talking about encountering God today, the God of the Bible. Before we get into it, we do talk about this book more in our groups, small groups. So just to point attention to a QR code, if you'd like to download the discussion guide, that's available there. And so we're going through this book together in our groups for us adults. And there's more questions that come out of this that we really need to look at, not just on a Sunday morning, but away from here. And we're up to chapter 3 in the story. And I have a little overview as well, maybe we can show as well, David, which shows where we're at, where we're heading to. So there we go. We've covered the introduction. We're in the story of Moses, and we're going to follow these chapters till about halfway of the book. Okay. And so what we're looking at today is really a part 1. Part 2 is next Sunday. So let's talk about what would it be like to encounter the God of the Bible. Encountering the God of the Bible. There's all kinds of things we could think about here to have an encounter with God. This story happens on a mountain. And so Moses sees the burning bush, a voice speaks to him, right, and calls to him and introduces as God. And there's something about this scene that is one of the highlights of the scriptures. A person meets with God. And then we think about what would that be like to encounter God. Maybe we're here because we have had some experience with God in the past. And if we were to look back on that or think about that, maybe there was a feeling involved, some feeling or some sense of another presence. Maybe there was a sense of love or a sense of vulnerability. Maybe there was a sense of fear. What was the feeling involved? Maybe there was a sense of assurance. Maybe there was a circumstance that you remember in this time where you were in a particular need or trouble or struggle, or maybe you were lost, some circumstance, and you just know that there was some encounter with God in that moment. There's different ways we could describe what it's like to encounter God, but in the Bible, so far, what we see is when someone would meet with the God of the Bible, first of all, it was personal, so there was either a person that would interact with someone in the story, there was a person involved, and there was a voice that would come to the person. So I'm thinking about the story of Adam and Eve. I'm thinking about the story of Cain. I'm thinking of the story of Noah and the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so forth. Encountering the God of the Bible involved a personal interaction. So it's not a cloud up in the sky or sun rays on the face. It's personal. And there is a message. There's a message. That at least gives us a sense of what it's like to encounter the God of the Bible. Now, what makes this story interesting is that it becomes more vivid. This is different from God's previous meetings in Genesis, when God met those ways. Now there's a scene on a mountain. And now there's a burning bush that doesn't go out, right? It's fascinating. It's vivid. And here is Moses about to encounter the holy God. Now it says in the first verse that Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law, and he was in the wilderness. He comes to this mountain. All of these details are significant, but I just need to keep moving this morning. And it says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. The bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. So a bit about Moses. Since our last message last week, 40 years have passed. It's a long time. 40 years since Moses grew up as a prince and chose to identify with his people, the Hebrews, in their slavery. And he killed an Egyptian and was found out about it, so he ran away from Egypt in fear and finds this family, these Midianites, and he takes one of them as a wife, and now he works as a shepherd in the wilderness. 40 years have passed. So he's around 80 years old, is the reckoning. Not only is that a long time, but his whole lifetime, right, has come to this point where he is now old. He's near 80. And you just think, what would that be like for someone to have lived his life, have had all those experiences, and he's now at this point in his life, right? What is left for him? What time is left? What is left for him time-wise? It seems like his life is nearing an end. And coming away from Egypt, Moses had grown up as the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. And so he would have had all the education and privileges, the status, the wealth that would have come with being that prince. And once he ran away from Egypt, all of that was cut off. So overnight, he lost all of that position and resource. And so over those 40 years in the wilderness, Moses has had to work with his hands, caring for, feeding, protecting the flock. He deals with animals now. Actually, we know from archaeology that this was seen as a very low job for an Egyptian. And this is the job that Moses has. And you can imagine working in the fields like this, dependent on good weather, favorable conditions, protection from people that would harm them. It'd be a very vulnerable life. And so he's gone from all of that comfort and protection and wealth to this very vulnerable living as a shepherd. We don't want to rush to psychologize what Moses was feeling and thinking. I think we should let the Bible guide us about what was Moses' condition before trying to psychologize it or to read ourselves into Moses. Okay. What the Bible does say for sure is that Moses was afraid. That's why he left. And next week we'll see how he's still afraid. There's some other conditions that he's going through that the Bible tells us, but I can't help but wonder if Moses, in those decades taking care of the sheep, if he must have wondered, what is the purpose of my life? What was it all for? Right? To be rescued from the water as an infant, brought into the palace, and then it all turns sour. He's got to run away. And maybe at first he thought, I'm sure there's a way back. I'm sure there's a way I can, do more for my people. But year after year goes by, and then decades. And now he's an older man. What's left for me? What's my purpose? Again, you can't help but wonder if Moses may have had that kind of thought. Where is God? What's my purpose? And so, at this time of his life, he sees a burning bush. For all the things he might have seen in the wilderness, this was something he had never seen before. A bush on fire, but it doesn't go out. And so Moses decides, I will turn aside to see this great sight. Turn aside means he's on a detour. He was going on his normal track, but now he's going out of his normal track to see for himself what's going on. Now, I think there's a little tiny clue there for all of us, that if we feel a little bit like Moses sometimes, what's my purpose? What time is left to me? Where's the resource? It's interesting that Moses did have to make a detour. He had to come out of his normal track. Without dwelling on it too much, he makes this detour, and in verse 4, the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, so God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. God appears to Moses in a flame of fire. That's interesting. That's not typically the way that God may have appeared previously to people in the previous book in Genesis, but here God appears in a flame of fire, a fire that doesn't go out. We'll come back to that. But there are other times in the scriptures where God appears and there's very much this sense of flame, fiery presence of God. There's something in that when God would appear to the prophets or others. And later on in Revelation, you just see something of the fire of God. And that's an interesting visual. Just a couple of days ago at home in our fire pit, put some wood in, set it alight, and it's going up really nicely. And it's beautiful to look at. It's mesmerizing. At the same time, it is dangerous, and you can't get too close, right? So there would have been something of this in this appearance where it's mesmerizing but also dangerous. And the first thing God says to Moses in verse 5 is stop. Stop. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you're standing is holy ground. He didn't say to Moses, you're about to step on holy ground. He says to Moses, you are on holy ground. Where you are already is holy. And you're coming into my presence with your shoes on. And so in this culture, again, that's not right. And so Moses he's in danger. He's standing where he shouldn't be standing. Right? And God reveals himself to Moses in verse 6. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So taking all of this scene together on the mountain, a bush on fire that doesn't go out, the instruction that you're on holy ground in my presence, what does Moses do? Now this is key. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. See, to encounter the God of the Bible means to realize that you're encountering the holy God, the God who is set apart, the God who is different, utterly different. And for the first time in his life, Moses, who had, always known of God, is now in God's presence. And he is overwhelmed with the sense of God's holiness. He hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. If you know the story of the Bible, this is not unusual. When God meets with people, this is the kind of reaction they have. They tremble, they fall down, they hide from God's appearance. There's a sense of fear. Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. It's too much. It's too pure to be in God's presence. That's what Moses instinctively, naturally felt in the presence of God. Now, that makes us reflect about how we view encountering God. Because what we see here is that it's not going to be casual. It's not going to be something that's forgettable. It's not going to be something that you can take it or leave it. This is life-changing. It's transformative. You're not the same after you've been with the God of the Bible. God has a vision of hope to give to Moses at this time. If I can share this with you. In verse 7, I have surely seen the affliction of my people. I have heard their cry. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them. Long, long time, God's people had been in Egypt. It felt like home to them, but everything had turned terrible for them, where they'd been put into slavery. And the people are crying out to God now, where are you, God, in all of this? And God says, I'm seeing it. I'm hearing it. I know what you're suffering. And he says, I have come down. I've come down to deliver them. I've come down to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land. This is the vision of hope that God has for his people. I'm aware. I'm going to rescue you, and I'm going to bring you to this land. In verse 9, the cry of the people has come to me. I have seen the oppression. All of the questions that the people would have been asking God, God is saying, here's the answer. I'm hearing you. I'm seeing you, and I will act. And then God has a message for Moses in this vision. In verse 10, come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people out of Egypt. Now, that would be, I'm sure, somewhat troubling for Moses. It's one thing for God to say, I'm going to deal with it, but it's another thing for God to say, and I want you to go to Pharaoh. So that is troubling. And that's what Moses responds with in verse 11. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Right? Maybe in Moses' mind, he had his time. His time was maybe past. Maybe in his mind, who am I? I don't have anything like the resources that I used to have. I don't even know what I'm doing here. Who am I? But in verse 12, God says, I will be with you. This shall be the sign for you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So what God is saying is, we're going to meet here again with everybody. And that'll remind you of my words. It's a vision of hope. Moses has one more question for God here in verse 13. He says, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God says something about himself which carries on through the rest of the Bible. God says to Moses, I am who I am. This is such a fascinating way for God to say his name, fascinating name that God gives to Moses. There's so much that we could look about here. God says, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. I remember reading this when I was a young person, and it just didn't sound clear. Right? What does that mean? I am has sent me to you. I couldn't get my head around it. All these years later, I still can't get my head around it. Okay? And one way you could translate it is, say to the people of Israel, the being has sent me to you. What does it mean? Well, one thing we can know for sure is that when God says, I am who I am, God is saying, I depend on nothing. I am self-existent. And this is unique of God, that does not depend on anything, anyone. God is eternal, has always been, always will be. I am who I am. I am, God says. There is no one else that can make that claim. Then there's no one else that can name themselves in this way. God says, I am who I am. I am completely self-existent. God is unique this way. God is eternal. Just God's name in itself would cause you to wonder about who this God is. But God goes on to tell Moses in detail what God is planning for his people. The message that God wants his people to hear. And then God says in verse 18 what will happen next. The people will listen. And you will go to the king of Egypt and say to him to let them go to serve God. God says in verse 19, the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt, and he will let you go. God gives a vision not only of rescue, but of prosperity. He says, the people will have favor in the sight of the Egyptians. When you go, you shall not go empty. But you'll go away with silver, gold, and clothing. And this is fascinating because the people are in such a state of slavery and oppression. What God is giving them here is a vision of something they could probably not even imagine. How could this possibly be? It sounds incredible, what God is saying here. God has an incredible vision here. And the source of it is in his own nature, the fact that he is self-existent. You know, when it comes to the uniqueness of the God of the Bible, that is very different from the way many people view God. There's a very common idea, which is, well, you're a Christian and I'm this or I'm that, but you know what? We all worship the same Spirit. There's many roads up to the mountain, okay? And so no matter what your background is, no matter what my background is, it all leads to truth. And that's a very common view because it sounds respectful. We don't want to be offensive to people that we might work with or live around. So that sounds like a compromise to say something like that. And so we have these minor religious differences, but we're all worshiping the same Spirit. But that is not what the Bible story is telling us here. What we're seeing from this vision of God and his message is something that is really unique. There's no one like the God of the Bible, who is self-existent, holy, who can cause us to have a sense of fear that we wouldn't have otherwise. Now, God says, my name is I am. In other words, I am who I am, not I am who you want. And again, when we think about who God is, and we think about that or project in our minds what God is like, we can't help sometimes but try to define God for ourselves. So I was talking with someone a while back who had a difficulty happen in their life, and it is holding them back in terms of faith. And when I asked the question, where do you think God is in this difficulty? The person said, I just can't believe that God would allow that to happen to me. So it was a difficult situation. It happened. And in this person's mind, whoever God is, I don't think God should have done that, should have allowed that to happen. And so what's happened in that experience is you have mentally limited God. You've said, well, God, you can bless me, you can lead me, you can help me out when I need help, but you're not allowed to do that. You can't do that. You've broken my parameters for who you are. And in our minds, we limit our understanding of who God is. Moses is facing the heat of God's presence, the purity, the perfection of God. And it's not a God of his imaginings. It's not the God that he thought he knew, right? It is the God of the Bible. I am who I am. Well, there's one more thing here in the story. Can I share with you? Moses is afraid. He hides his face. It's hot in the presence of God. How is it that Moses was not consumed, was not immediately judged in the presence of the holy God? Do you ever wonder about that? God told him to stop because he's on holy ground. We know what Moses did in his past. He killed a man. Why wasn't Moses judged right away? At the very beginning of the story, it tells us that out of the burning bush, it says, the angel of the Lord appeared. This is an interesting person. What we find about the angel of the Lord is someone different from the typical angel of heaven. In the stories where the angel of the Lord meets with someone, this is someone who receives worship. Now, typically, the angels will not accept worship. Only God should accept worship. But this angel of the Lord, this person who's different, accepts worship, which tells us that this is a divine person. The angel of the Lord appears, and it's the angel of the Lord who sees what Moses is doing. And as we'll see next week as well, it is this person who is really mediating for Moses. He's between Moses and God. God says to Moses to go to Egypt. Moses doesn't want to go. And God says, I will send my angel before you. He'll go with you. If Moses didn't have this angel of the Lord standing between him and God, he would be toast. He'd be judged. But there is this person standing between. Now that's so important for us because many years later Jesus comes and he's in debate, in argument with the religious leaders, you remember? And they're priding themselves because they're children of Abraham. And you remember what Jesus says? He says, before Abraham was, I am. He doesn't just say, before Abraham was, I was. In other words, that would make Jesus an ancient figure. But he says, I am. The same wording where God gives his name to Moses. And the religious leaders knew exactly what Jesus was saying because they picked up stones to stone him. They know what Jesus was saying there. That Jesus is saying, the person who was speaking to Moses out of the burning bush is the person speaking to you now. That's the identity of Jesus. If you remember Jesus when he was ministering and he was in the temple, he had to cast out the money changers, and you remember the disciples, they remembered something about the Messiah, which is zeal for God's house has consumed me. Jesus was burning with passion for God's honor, for God's glory. He was burning to do what God wanted. He had that fire to follow God. Now, that brings us back to the story, and if I could get us to just reflect on that mountain there. Moses, his life has turned upside down. He has come in contact with the God of the Bible. His life will not be the same. You could say that this was his conversion, his turnaround. At the same time, even though God has given this great vision, the way ahead is uncertain. There are going to be unexpected challenges for Moses and his people, challenges that will test their faith and lead them to question in God. What we see from God's vision so far, what we will see that every word will prove true, that his promises in every line will come to pass. We'll see that. But we'll also see something in Moses as well. For Moses, the sense of the task seemed impossible. How could God use someone like this and send him back to that place to do this impossible task? It would have been overwhelming. Perhaps his sense of time was also challenged. As an older man who may have thought his time was over, what will God do with someone like this at this time in his life? Wait and see. God is going to do an incredible wonder through Moses to save his people. The good news for us is that we have the same mediator today. If we were to encounter the God of the Bible, we would be toast. We would be dead meat before the God of the Bible. We would want to hide in fear. But that is why Jesus was sent. God sent Jesus on our behalf to be that mediator between us and God, so that he takes upon himself all of our guilt, all of our failures and sin, and instead he gives us his pure righteousness, so that God sees us just like he sees Jesus. It's an incredible exchange that happens when someone puts their faith in Jesus and says, you are the only one that I'm giving my life to. I'm going to turn my life over to you. What was before fear becomes something godly. It's actually the right fear of God. What would before lead you to question, what's my purpose? Why don't I have the resource? How much time do I have? All of that is put upon the Lord. And wait and see what God will do with it. We're going to have our time with the bread and cup of Holy Communion this morning, and we're going to gather those in a moment. As we're gathering, I can't help but think, as we're taking the bread and the cup this morning, what gives us the right to participate in the bread and the cup? Right? Just to be really open with you today, I recently saw someone who is a Christian, and they're part of a church, not this church. And I know something about that person that is not right, that something has not been resolved. And when I saw this person, I couldn't help but think in myself, how can that person call themselves a Christian after what they did? How can they show up in church because of what happened? And I just thought that in my own mind. And thank God, eventually I came to the point of, well, what gives me the right to be in church and to serve and to speak? What am I standing on? Because God knows all of my life, and God sees everything I've done and not done. To be in the presence of God, we have that realization about ourselves. So it's not just what about that person, it's what about me? So when I take the bread and the cup this morning, it's not a right that I've earned, right? It's a right that has been given to me because Jesus gave his life for me. That is the only right that I have in taking these symbols this morning. And so I can just say thank you to God. I have the confidence before God to take it. Not because I've worked up to it, but because Jesus has done this for me. Thank you, Jesus. Let's continue to give thanks this morning.